We are very excited about today's session where we will be interviewing a couple of our HR Elite advisors. And so before we kind of take a look at what we're going to be covering, we'll just do some brief introductions. For those of you that we haven't met, my name is Jen Conway, and I am the Senior HR Sales Consultant for Coastal. So I work with our clients and our prospective clients to really kind of help them identify either which of our services or HR modules are going to be the best fit for them. And I am here today with my friend and colleague, Shelly Addy, our Chief Human Resources Officer.
Good morning.
Thank
you, Jen.
Yes, thank you, Shelly, as always, for doing these with us. We really do appreciate it. And of course, we will be introducing you to our HR advisors. But before we do, we want to make sure that we let you know what we're going to be covering today. And so first off, we're going to introduce you to both Deidre and Gloria, who are senior HR advisors with our HR Elite program. And we're just going to learn a little bit about what they do day to day to help support our HR Elite clients. I think you'll find it really interesting because it's no day is typical. That's one thing we've learned. We'll very, very briefly take a look at HR Elite. You're going to hear a lot about it just in their day to day, but it'll just give you kind of a big picture of what's included within the scope of the service. And then with any time remaining, we will do our very best to answer questions. So if you do have any questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A rather than the chat. If for some reason we don't get to your questions, we'll make sure to reach out to you personally. Okay. So before we introduce our advisors, one thing that we did want to do is let you know what the heck HR Elite actually is. These are our HR Elite advisors. So just to give you a very 30,000-foot view, our HR Elite service is what I like to consider really our comprehensive, proactive, and then customized way of helping our clients with HR. And with it, we assign you a dedicated HR advisor. And so this is Deidre, this is Gloria right here. And this person, this advisor becomes your new go-to for all things HR. And they work in conjunction with an HR specialist. So you're actually getting kind of a team of two and they act as an extension of you from an HR standpoint. So you would remain, or somebody in your organization remains, that face of HR to the employees. And then we really view our role as being there to help support you and have your back proactively to help protect you as the employer. And one thing that we really wear like a badge of honor is this ratio. We really feel that this is what distinguishes us from most HR consulting environments. And it's that in a typical HR consulting environment, you'll usually see about 70 to 80 clients assigned to each advisor. In the big box payroll world and kind of PEO world, we've seen it go up to anywhere from 150 to 180 clients assigned to each advisor. And it's just our opinion, I know it's certainly Shelly's, that you cannot be proactive and get to know a client and how they operate when you have that many clients to support. You just don't physically have the bandwidth to do it. And so it is, like I mentioned, kind of a big source of pride for us that we cap our advisors at 25 to 30 clients each. And that is what allows them to be proactive with you, to get to build that kind of tribal knowledge of your organization, how you work, what's important to you. And I think that will really come across when you hear a little bit from each of our advisors today. So with that, I'm going to turn it to you, Shelly, to introduce both Deidre and Gloria.
All right. Thank you, Jen. And yes, to your point, that is one of our pride and joys, I guess, prides and joy. That we want to become a part of the brain trust, really, and you can't do that when you have 80 or 180 clients. So let's talk about these two senior HR advisors. Deidre Goro, I'll let you read about her background. I want to tell you a little bit about her journey here at HR Elite. This program has been here now since 2018 officially. We did a pilot year in 2017, but Deidre joined early in 2019 as the 5th employee of this program, and she joined as an HR specialist. So learned kind of from the ground up, learned all the projects and how to manage all of that. She was promoted to an HR advisor and then a senior HR advisor, where she has a team of other advisors and specialists, right? And she helps to support them, support their clients, in addition to supporting her own clients. And Deidre has a lot of our, because of her tenure, she has a lot of our longer term clients who have been with us for a long time. And many of them, just interestingly, are very small. They're not huge companies, right? So that she has a specialty in that.
Okay.
Let's move on to Gloria Bracey. Gloria is a senior HR advisor, also with a team, but she started as an HR specialist in March 2020. Yes, 1 week before the shutdown. And so Gloria's been with us a long time too, and she had to learn in a very different way than others did before her, right? Because she was working from home. Anyway, Gloria, you can see, has, also a very diverse background. Gloria works with a lot of our larger clients. So we thought this would be interesting, right? Because we have two senior advisors who certainly can work with small or large, but they have a tendency to kind of migrate towards, the either end of the spectrum. So welcome, Deidre and Gloria. We're so, you know how proud I am of you. And we're glad that you're here today to share about your days.
Yes. So with that, today is really much more of a conversation. So I'm going to take the PowerPoint down and we're just going to chat. And this has been really fun for me too, because, I spend my days speaking with employers about this service. And then it's been really fun to hear the stories that both Deidre and Gloria have to share about what they do for our clients. So Shelley, I'll let you kick it off and I'll just be kind of sprinkling in some questions and comments, and let's go.
All right.
Take it from here.
Well, so let's start. Deidre, I know more than anyone else, I guess, the same as you, that there is not one typical day in the life of an HR person. And especially when you have 25 to 30 clients, right? It's not the same as being an internal HR person, right? So why don't you tell our guests, whoever wants to go first, tell our guests about, as much as you can, a typical day in the life of a senior HR advisor with HR Lead.
Yeah. And Deidre, I'll go first. Okay. Yeah. And sorry, me and Deidre were actually in the same room. So if you see me looking over that way, I'm making eye contact with her. So that's why I keep looking up there.
You're having an actual conversation.
Right.
Yeah. Conversation. But yes, great question, Shelley. And kind of just like what you said, no 2 days are alike. I'm pretty sure even my days are so different to even just Deidre's days. But one thing that is kind of really consistent, I always start out my mornings just kind of checking my emails, making sure that there's nothing that's come in from the prior night, no fires and stuff that I need to put out with the clients. I'll check in with my team just to see if there's any support that they need with me. They do work a lot more on the projects than what I do. So maybe they're, finishing something. They need me to review it before they actually send it to the client. So we'll also do things like that. But kind of starting my day out like that will kind of help me attempt. And I say attempt because it never always works out like that. But it helps me try to focus on, those urgent ER matters that need my immediate attention, right? Sometimes.
And just real quick, when you say ER, Gloria, you're talking about employee relations.
Yes,
issues, right? Okay.
Yeah, fires, employee relation, ER, employee relation issues. We kind of all put those under the same bucket. Okay. But some of those could even be a client is doing a termination, but they need to talk to me before they actually meet with the employee to do that a termination too. So thinking back, so last Friday, I actually started my day by conducting an employee level anti-harassment training. So that's one of those harassment trainings that we provide at the employee level. It's 1 hour, and we do those a couple of times a month. We do an English and a Spanish version once a month for our clients.
And those rotate, right, Glo?
Yeah,
I mean,
those
like,
rotate.
it's not always Gloria who does it. Sometimes it's Deidre, sometimes it's another advisor.
Yeah. And then the advisor and specialist, if sometimes project admins are on there assisting, we kind of just take our charts kind of rotating out throughout the different months with those.
And we do them for both employees and for supervisory level.
Yeah, employees
Right.
and advisors, yes, and English and in Spanish for both. Yeah, so last week was actually pretty crazy for me. I had 5 clients that were having some of those employee relation matters, right? Those fires that were going on. And with those, it's never really like one of those like one and done, right? It's something where you kind of need to have those continual conversations, the follow-ups, those check-ins. So for example, one of my clients, and as Shelley was saying, I do have more of the larger clients, right? I have a lot more of restaurant groups, you know, multiple locations. So one of my restaurants had a bullying allegation against one of the managers. So what actually had been going on, this was a new manager for that location, and this employee for some reason didn't want to do what the manager was telling him. And it wasn't anything different than his daily job, right? It was all stuff that was in his job description. But whenever the manager would ask him to do something, he would either tell the manager no, or he would just like walk away, ignore him, not do it. So this particular instance, the manager had asked him to do something. The employee took himself outside for a cigarette break. When he came back, the manager said, "You can clock out and go home, right? You're not gonna, be here to do your job. There's no point you being here. You can leave." The employee left. When he got home, he sent an email to HR, my point of contact, and said that the manager was bullying him. So of course, he said those trigger words that we all know. So I talked to the client, let her know that she would have to investigate what was going on. We talked about some questions for her to ask. And then she called me same day and said, he actually gave me some witnesses, right? These are supposedly some other employees that were around when these allegations were going on. So I let her know, okay, well, now you have to go and meet with these witnesses. We need to, find out the based off of the examples, what exactly was going on. And it wasn't just like 1 or 2. There was like 5 witnesses that he had mentioned. So I met with the client the next day. None of these witnesses were actually matching up to what this employee was saying. So then she actually met with the manager, let him know all of these different allegations, what the examples were that was being provided. And unfortunately, the bullying allegation just couldn't be substantiated. So she met with the employee, let him know we couldn't substantiate it. He didn't really fight it at all, even though he said that there was all of these witnesses around. He didn't fight it. But they just let him know that this is your job, this is your manager. Please make sure you're respectful and professional at all times. And knock on wood, everything's been okay since then. So that's just kind of an example of how we kind of walk a client through an ER issue as well.
And Glo, can I
Yeah.
jump in? I'm sorry, because I heard you say the next day, right? So like, how many days did you spend working with this one issue?
This was 3 days. So Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and actually the beginning of my Friday morning as well is when we finally was able to wrap everything out. So it's just because it's a lot of back and forth, right? It's not, she needed to meet with the employee based off of the allegations. Then he had mentioned witnesses and other people's schedules. It doesn't always fall where you can meet with them the same day, especially in the restaurant industry. Everyone has different schedules. So they needed to make sure that they were working with that. Then when they got all of the information back from the witnesses, then they actually had to meet with the accused, present him with all of the information, then come back to me, give me the information, and then meet with the employee again to be like, unfortunately, none of this could be substantiated. Another thing that did take a little bit of their time was they have cameras. So they were able to review some of the cameras for some of this stuff. Like he had one one of the examples they had given was that the manager was running through, chasing after him, like really, you know, aggressively. But when they look on the camera, they just see him walking into HR's office. So none of the stuff was kind of, you know, it wasn't adding up.
Right.
But the reason it takes so long is you do have to do that deep dive and look at all of those things individually.
Yeah, you got
Right.
it.
Well, and you also have other clients, right? So it's you're balancing these activities with the activities of other clients, you know,
Yeah.
kind of to get back to the day in the life, right? I mean, it's
Yeah.
this is only part of your day,
Yeah.
but it's part of every day of the
Right.
week.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that I had going on, but I had that times 5. So I had another client that was dealing with some gossiping, but it was actually like really like malicious gossiping. There was a sexual harassment investigation that was going on, just really inappropriate conduct. So I had all of those going on with, not always with my big clients, but the larger clients are going to have more of those ER, employee relation issues, because they are bigger. They do have more employees.
Yeah.
So I had that. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then on Friday, after we got done finalizing all of that, I actually had an assessment meeting. And my assessment meeting was with a new client. So with that, the new client has, I think, 3 weeks now that they've been with us. We've already done our kickoff meeting, which is that first free meeting that we do with everyone. And then we had received all of the documents from them, from that red, yellow, and green chart that we sent. And that chart, we call it internally red, yellow, and green chart, but it's called the assessment chart because it literally is red, yellow, and green. Their documents that are listed in the red are going to be all of those high compliance documents, and then anything that's listed in green is going to be more so of those best practices, you know, those best things to have. So
if you don't mind, I'm just going to piggyback on that. And so really what Gloria is referencing here with this assessment chart is that for every new HR Elite client that comes on board, we do kick off the relationship by doing a full audit of their HR. And the advisors utilize that red, yellow, green chart, that assessment chart, to perform the audit.
Perfect. Yeah. Kind of just like what Jim was saying, and in order for us to really do that deep dive, that's kind of more so what we do in our assessment meeting, this meeting that I was doing with the client. And that's because we really talk to them about all of their different HR functions, right? So we talk about the staffing and onboarding process, right? What does that recruitment process look like to them? What is their selection process? And that selection process is, what type of questions do you have developed during that interview process? Do you have different questions for different positions, different departments, different things like that? We also do a deep dive into the training, right? Besides the anti-harassment training, what other training is required by the company? And this can be like internal training that they want. It can be specific industry training, job required training, and also sometimes if they have like any internal training that's developed for them internally as well through that. We talk about their company benefits, right? We all know everyone has to provide sick leave, but are they providing vacation? Are they doing any medical benefits? 401k, do they have the 401k registered with Cal Savers, right? These are all of the kind of deep dive things that we do with them. Do they have a performance management process? What does that look like? How often are you doing it? You know, compensation, we do a little bit of a deep dive into their culture. Are they happy with the culture? Was the culture built intentionally, or did it just kind of happen? And kind of like when we're going through this process, like we don't just ask these questions and just start writing our notes. We ask these questions to see if there's any gaps, right? And if they do have any gaps within any of their processes, we talk about that, right? You let them know, okay, well, as a best practice, this is what we would suggest. Or maybe it's not something that they have developed yet, but that they want to work on developing and kind of putting that into place. Now, because we do such a deep dive with it, this meeting is scheduled for about 2 hours. Sometimes we're able to get through them in about 90 minutes. And I know you're probably here in like 2 hours. Oh my goodness, who has the time for a 2 hour meeting? But I promise you, these are the quickest 2 hour meetings like you will ever have. A lot of times, like my clients, and I say Dee, she's shaking her head too. My clients are always like, wow, this is the quickest 2 hour meeting I've ever had. Just because it's very conversational, right? It's not interview style. We don't sit here and ask you question after question and write our notes. We do make it very conversational. We do make sure that we're doing that deep dive and we're getting the answers that we need to kind of assess you to see where you're at too. This also helps us know any different challenges that maybe they're faced with on a daily basis and what their goals are. So when we start working on that next phase, which is the strategic plan, we know what order that we're going to put all of those that stuff in. And the strategic plan is typically our final phase in that onboarding process that we do with a client. So we start off with the kickoff, the assessment, and then the strategic plan.
Right. And I know that, you know, you both work with different size companies. I mean, and that, you know, a lot of times it gets very industry specific. Can you talk a little bit about how the support you provide for clients is maybe a little different from a smaller client to a larger client?
Yeah, we can talk about that, but I can also address like what my week looks like. If I know Gloria went through a lot, but
Yeah, I know. I'm exhausted after hearing about
that was a
today.
lot. I was
Now I
like,
have to hear about Deidre's.
I'm not going to talk that long. Like you covered a lot.
But no,
Sorry.
please tell us. Yeah.
But to your point, like a lot of the things that Gloria said is kind of similar with me, to be honest with you, with all advisors in general. Like that typically is like our day to day, and it's not typical actually. It's very different, and it's very like I don't know what's going to happen today. I have a plan of what I would like to happen, but sometimes it's not always the case. But yeah, I usually start my days with looking at my calendar, like seeing what I have planned for the day, like what meetings are on there, what projects am I going to help with. I like Shelly said, I have a team too, so I check in with them. We talk through things, go through my emails every day to see like what's going on. And again, like while I'd love to say I'm going to stick with what's on my calendar or what's on my to-do list, like that's just really not the case. As an advisor, we're here for our clients when they need send an urgent email or give us an unplanned phone call. So it's not solely based again off of like pre-planning or anything like that. But it is interesting that Gloria was talking about all her employee relations issues, because that's actually something I've been going through the past couple of weeks, where a lot of my days were consisting of just various employee relations issues. I actually had one client who had 4 different issues. Wow. And that took up almost my whole week. Shelly was asking earlier, like, oh, when you had your employee issue, like, how long were you working on that for? Like with that one client who had 4 different issues, I was working with them for those 2 weeks consistently, not all day, but like there was a good chunk of every day where we were in contact to talk about something. You know, 3 of them were employee relations, different reasons, and then one of them was for a possible layoff. So that was something that I went through the past couple of weeks in my day. It's not always the case where we're that busy with employee relations, but I don't know, maybe there was something in the water. It just was.
It goes in phases. It does.
Yeah,
I feel like HR does that. It's like that ebb and flow.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So definitely that was happening. And then something else I did last week was we actually went to a law seminar in the morning. So that's not something we typically do, but we did go to one last week, which was really good and educational. So we did that. And then I worked on a few projects later that day. But yeah, I could say that every day is not a typical day. But another thing I did actually do last week that Gloria mentioned towards the end was strategic plan. So that's also a part of that new client onboarding process. And I have a newer client where we worked on it, and just to kind of shed some light on what that plan is and why we create these, it outlines the projects that we're going to be working on going forward, and we focus on those in phases. And it's because, you know, one project might be an extensive project and it might take longer than something else that could be developed in maybe like a week. One might take a little bit longer. So it just depends. But in that strategic plan, we talk about like, okay, do we want to focus on employee handbooks, new hire packets, termination packets, job descriptions, performance reviews, all of the things that you discussed in that assessment meeting she was talking about. And not only are we deciding which ones do we want to work on first, but we're also trying to see like, okay, what is it that that company needs to focus on? Like, because then there is those high risk items and then those lower risk items based off of that red, yellow, green chart. So that's kind of how we're creating that strategic plan. And then again, we're doing it in phases. So we always start our phases with like those high risk items, which typically ends up being an employee handbook because, and I'll actually probably talk about that a little bit later too, because I think that's an important thing to discuss and with one of my stories that I might have. Yeah, so we do those, we put those plans in place, because if we don't, then the client's going to be out of compliance. So that's kind of what the strategic plan is. And we don't have it set in stone, but it's definitely a good plan of action, right? So after we have discussed what the strategic plan is going to be, how we're going to start implementing all of these things that we're putting in place, we'll also talk through how we want to hold each other accountable and responsible for getting these things done. Do we want to schedule weekly, bi-weekly, monthly, regular meetings with each other to ensure like we have sufficient collaboration and communication with one another? Because that's really important for us to be able to help your company. And it helps us work collaboratively and make sure that we're staying on top of things. I personally push for scheduling, at least in the beginning of the relationship, a weekly or a bi-weekly meeting, only because, you know, I've seen a lot of clients say, we're ready and we're excited to get things going. And then we send them emails to follow up on things and like, it's just silent. And then a month or two goes by and we haven't really accomplished much. And let's keep in mind, I know that this doesn't happen because the client doesn't want to not respond to it, but because they're probably just wearing multiple hats and they have their internal like priorities that they're attending to. But with that is another reason why I do love to set up those regular scheduled meetings, because it does hold all of us accountable. And when they go on their calendar for the day, like, oh, I'm meeting with HR late today, great, you know?
Mm-hmm. I think I get really good feedback because I think that is really what a lot of employers like, is knowing that they have that consistent touch point with you to make sure, okay, are these things getting done? Right. And so I think just that it kind of speaks to that proactive piece to make sure that stuff doesn't slip through the cracks. I mean, that's a lot of times why people are bringing us on board, right? They know they're wearing multiple hats and they need us to do a lot of that heavy lifting.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not only like in the beginning where we're just saying, but we also do like end of year reviews with our clients where we'll set up another meeting at the end of the year and we'll talk about like, okay, what did we accomplish this year? What are the things we're still working on? Okay, now what do we want to focus on going forward? So it's very proactive and it's very ongoing. Absolutely.
Yeah. The strat plan, I think, is like a living document, you know, it's constantly evolving and going back to it and all of this. The other thing I wanted to mention, though, that even though you have this cadence of meetings that you set up, that doesn't mean that clients don't have those employee relations issues that they can call about in between.
Oh, sure.
You know, nobody has to wait for that meeting if there's an emergency of some sort. But but I agree.
We always make it a practice to say that, like always, like it's always like, don't just think you can talk to me during our meeting, like call or email anytime. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. But I think the meetings are great anyway, to everybody's point. I mean, it's just helps to keep things moving.
And I'll kind of just sprinkle this in here because I do think this is something that a lot of employers appreciate about the service as well, is that we don't cap the hours that you can work with your advisor. So there are HR consulting services out there that will limit the amount of time that a consultant can spend with you in any given month. And we don't do that. So, and partly that's because we know there is that weird ebb and flow to HR. It seems like it comes in He was right. Might use us a bunch one month and not as much the next. So,
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Yeah.
all right. So I sorry I interrupted you, Deidre.
No, that's okay. No, I was just going to say too, that those larger, the big box consulting divisions have to do that because they have 180 clients,
Mhm.
Yeah, exactly.
right? So anyway, okay. Did you have
Yeah.
more, Deidre?
No, but I know that Jen was also asking about what the HR support looks like for companies of different sizes. So
Right.
I was gonna maybe touch base on that one next. Gloria, if you're okay, maybe I can touch base on like more of the smaller
Yeah.
sizes, and then if you want to touch base on larger.
Yeah.
So I would say that both small and large clients, they need support for a variety of reasons. But the reason I think I'm going to touch base on what I've experienced companies of smaller sizes of like, because I just have a lot more of those actually, to be honest with you. And I do see a little bit of a trend for the HR support that they're needing. They need someone that can help them build an infrastructure and get policies and procedures in place for them. So for example, I have a smaller based client and they've been established for around 7 years. But they've never had a dedicated HR person or even like an operations person or anyone really devote time to put any HR practices into place for their company. So when they came on board with us, they were like, yeah, we don't have anything. So we're starting from scratch. I do see that a lot. See that a lot with companies because when they're first starting their business, they're trying to get their business going. So they're not really thinking about those other like back end like compliance issues or thinking about how am I going to start generating to build this business up, right? Make money. So as a smaller company, their focus again, from what I notice about those organizations is that they come to us because they are ready to start having a little bit more of that like hand holding to ensure that they have what they need to be successful, especially if they are striving to grow and they do have, expected growth within a certain time period. And if they do, then it'll be a challenge for them to do that when they don't have that foundation in place. Now, regardless of size, one of the most important items that a company needs to stay compliant, and which we talk about with every single client, is an up-to-date employee handbook. And going back again to why I chose to talk about what HR support looks like for smaller companies is that one that I was referring to where they've been around for like 7 years, theirs hadn't been updated probably since the beginning of time, to be very honest with you. So it was really, really outdated. And they acknowledged that and they were like, that's why we're here. We need help. So what me and my team did, because like Jen and Shelley were saying earlier, we have a team of advisors, but then we have dedicated specialists that also help with our clients. So they have a team of 2 at all times, each client. So what we did to support them was we provided them with a customized employee handbook. With every process, we add several comments throughout to ask questions about their internal practice or policy to ensure that like what's reflected in the handbook actually aligns with their actual practices. They opened the handbook and they just got really overwhelmed because they're like, I have no idea. Like, I don't know what I don't know, right? Like I told you, I know nothing. Like I said an HR word and they were like, what does that mean? Like, I need you to like, so that's what was going on with them. And so basically they were like, I don't know where to start. And we were like, okay, we're going to have a heavy collaboration on this handbook. Okay, we're going to go through and we're going to go through each policy and talk about what we believe is the best practice that we want to put in place for each thing for you that aligns with you. What our advice is going to be or what our best practice on like what we think you should do and what do you guys think aligns with that. So we have big conversations. We had multiple meetings on it because it's kind of hard to get that done in one. But within those multiple meetings, we went through its entirety. And at the end of it, they were like, this was really helpful. It was educational. And they loved that we were able to provide them with feedback on like, what is a best practice and what isn't. And like, let's talk through what do you guys want your practice to be? So they were really, really thankful about that. And they appreciated the time that we took to go through each of those policies so that not only are we talking about it, but for them to actually have like a really true understanding of what each policy actually means. When when I talk to my clients, all of my clients about handbooks, I always make a comment that like, okay, your handbook is like your Bible. And I know based off of what I've kind of already said with multiple meetings and going through every policy, it might sound like scary or exhausting talking about how extensive it can be to create, but once it's done, you're good. Like you have that solid foundational handbook, and then all you really need to do is a yearly update for like legal updates, or maybe if you've changed a couple of your internal practices and you want to update it in there. So it's really simple after that. It's also something that you and your employees are going to reference at least, I'd say 80% or more of the time when questions are asked about, you know, your company's policy or procedure. You're always gonna be like, oh, let's look at our handbook. Let's see what the handbook says. So to have a handbook is one thing, but to have a handbook and actually understand and be able to address questions that you're being asked about from your employees is another.
Right.
Part of my process is to obviously ensure each of my clients have a customized handbook, regardless of size. But it's not always requested to go through each policy individually together to that extent. But I did offer to do it for this client because although they're actually a lot smaller, but they're still liable, and you know they need to ensure that they have what they need to be compliant, right? And with like a larger company, I feel like they might have most of that already established. It's less likely that they're going to be asking us to go through it like that. I would say that for a larger company, they already have that developed and in place. And maybe what they would need is just like for us to review it, have it finessed and make a few updates here and there, make sure their legal updates are up to date and all of that. With the smaller companies, you know, what I notice is they want us to focus on getting a lot of things established because they don't already have it in place: forms, documents, policies, procedures. Most of the time, and again, most of the time, larger companies, they already have all of that established. And maybe what they want to utilize us more for is to focus on more of like the internal professional development, like training, leadership, or something in that nature. But it's not so much about building from the startup as it is with a smaller one. So,
Yeah.
A lot of times I've had some funny answers, and actually one client did say, I haven't updated this since the dawn of time. But, you know, and sometimes they will have been updating, like a good example that I see quite often is we might have a client that's been processing payroll with us, right? They've been updating their PTO accruals in payroll, but their handbook's like 10 years old or 2 years old, right? And it's not reflective of the policy, and yet they're still giving that handbook to employees, right? And so it's just not in alignment with what their actual policies are. Or they did a very template-y one that just is just trying to check the box, but it's not really reflective of what they do.
yeah. Oh yeah, we see that like almost 100% of the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I wouldn't even say that all large employers don't need it. I think they definitely need it less for sure.
Yeah.
But a lot of
they
times
all
they're
need
like,
it, but
yeah, they're just overhaul.
Yeah. Yeah. To kind of piggyback off of what Deidre was saying, you know, the smaller clients, they really do need that hand holding at the beginning to get that infrastructure in place, right? They want to make sure that they have that foundation in place with the employee handbook, compliant new hire packages, term packages. For my larger clients, I find that they already have a handbook in place. It's just those updates that you were talking about, Jen, that they need, right? Is it matching with what their current practice actually is? Because they needed that in place in order for them to grow, right? They couldn't grow if they didn't have that foundation in place where it needed to be. I find with my larger clients, and maybe you do too, is what they need now, and I think that's actually what you talked about, they need that additional support that is kind of going to help them maintain that growth, but also they need to look at the different ways that they can support their employees for their employee growth, right? That internal employee development. One thing that I like to offer my clients when I notice that that is a top focus for them, kind of like how Deidre does her HR check-ins, I do those too, but I like to also offer monthly management trainings for them. So I know, you know, we as a department, HR Elite, we do offer those monthly management trainings, you know, varying on topics. But what I like to do is I like to take my training and customize it to the client, right? I already know the company, I know the industry, I know their needs, I know their gaps. So I can really customize this to them and develop the training that they need based off of the employees that are going to be attending this. You know, what type of areas of focus that they need it to be on. My trainings are still the same. It's still the same 1 hour that we do. I do like to leave like maybe the last 10-15 minutes open for discussion with all of the attendees. We throw in some questions, some polls, just to make sure that everyone is kind of staying engaged. They're not just sitting there listening to me talk. But I find when I leave that 10-15 minutes open for them, this opens up the floor for them to have those questions for any type of clarification that they need on the training that we've provided. And sometimes they'll even bring some real life situations that they can relate to the training, right? They'll tell me what happened, what they did they do it right? What could they have done differently? What could they have done better? You know, if they did something wrong, why was it wrong? And how could they have done it? You know, how could they have done it differently?
Mm-hmm.
One thing that I noticed too is my larger clients are larger because they have multiple locations. So when we're doing the training like this all together, it kind of also standardizes that information that's being provided to everyone, right? A lot of times I'm the one that's worked with the client to help develop those policies and procedures. I know what the client is looking for in the training. They've given me their feedback while we're developing it. So I can ensure that I'm sharing that same information to everyone that's on the training, and it's provided consistently throughout for everyone. Some of the trainings that I noticed that we're kind of getting asked for when we're doing that internal development is a lot of that, how to handle, you know, that conflict resolution, right? Kind of going back to those employee relation issues, developing those people skills, performance management, best practices for conducting the performance management, how to set goals, how to provide constructive criticism, and then of course compliance training, right? Everyone always wants to make sure that they're up to date in all of those relevant labor laws and regulations to kind of help them minimize any of those legal risks.
Right, and I'll just piggyback on that too, Glo, if you don't mind, because you know, I don't know if any of you were able to join our last webinar, but that was really where we took a little bit of a deeper dive into those trainings, where it is a good mix of some of the more managerial or HR function type training that you need, but they also touch on some of those leadership skills, right? So because we do get feedback pretty darn frequently, I would say, from employers where they may have promoted people into roles because they were good at their job, but just didn't necessarily have the leadership side of things, right? They just needed to be upskilled in that capacity. And this is a great way to do that.
Right, yeah. One of our trainings that we actually have, it's a management 101, and it's, okay, you've just been promoted, now what? So, and that's literally how the training is, how to take what you knew before, but actually apply it in a leadership level to your peers, right? You went from working alongside of all of these employees, and now you're their leader. How does that change your relationship? How do you handle those changes? Different things like that. So yeah, we definitely develop those trainings for the clients too.
Yeah, if I could jump into just to kind of clarify that what Gloria mentioned is we hold an actual training webinar, a live webinar every month for all clients. But what she's saying, of course, is that she customizes for clients, and actually all of our advisors do that. So it's just all, you know, it's a part of the relationship that gets established where, you know, Gloria, Deidre, the other advisors know kind of what the client is needing, you know, like this might help if we could train your managers on this, you know. So we like to do that kind of thing too. We try not to do just only compliance, right? I mean, you know, it's a more well-rounded program.
Yeah.
So we have about 15 minutes left, and I just wanted to ask each of you a question. And they're two separate questions. So, you know, maybe you can just give us a quick story in response to each of these. Deidre, I'm gonna hit you first. So I want you to tell us about the client who has been with us, the longest, and the one you have several, but the one I'm thinking of has been with us since I think July of 2018. You know, about 6 years, and you started with them as a specialist.
Mhm.
But what do you know who I'm talking about?
I have two that I'm thinking of,
Okay, all right.
but
Well,
I
tell
think
me.
I know which one.
Yeah, pick one.
Okay, I'll pick
And
one.
tell our guests, what has it been like to support them over that length of time?
Yeah.
I mean, we've been together a long time.
Yeah, no, that's actually a really good question. And you're right. Like I do have a few clients that have been longstanding since I've been here, and they were HR elite before I got here. And with all of them, I started off as HR specialist, but you know, first off, I'd have to say, like, I've helped all of them in many ways and for different reasons. And that's why they continue to stay as long-standing clients. You know, a huge part of our roles as advisors are, like you were saying, Shelley, it's not just about like the compliance, it's like all around. You know, it is a lot of it is employee relations, which includes advising our point of contacts on how to handle employee conflict situations, harassment situations, or even talking through disciplinary processes, performance improvement plans, and just helping them make informed decisions. And then we also assist in just any general HR questions that they may have. But when I think of a specific client that I think you're thinking of, it's one where I've actually gone through like 3 or 4 different points of contact with them for this particular one. And every time a new one came on board, and it's not because, you know, they left because of me or something, or HR, it was because, you know, they just moved on to do other things. And in fact, with one of their last point of contact, I still keep in touch with them. So it's like we have that amazing relationship.
I think she retired, right? She
Yeah,
retired.
she retired.
Yeah.
Yes, and she moved. But we still have like a relationship, like we still keep in touch and just say hi, how are you and stuff. But what I do every time I've had to have a new point of contact is I make sure that I do a proper introduction to let them know who I am, how I can support them, what I've already done for their company throughout their time of having HR leads. If they're local here in San Diego, I'll even offer for them to come to Coastal's office so that we can do a more formal in-person meet and greet. Because I also think it's important that they know what kind of culture we at Coastal have and who they're actually going to be partnering with. So I think that they've appreciated that when they have came. It's really important that I make sure that I reestablish a relationship with that new point of contact. Otherwise, they're not going to see the value of what I can offer to help them with. With their most,
I'm sorry, I was just going to say, you also have the tribal knowledge.
Yeah.
You have something that they don't have, right? You've been the consistent force.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's actually what I was going to say next is that, like, with their most recent point of contact, or every time they've had one, but with their most recent one, you know, I've been working with her for almost a year now. And, you know, she told me, she's like, I appreciate like how you spend time with me to talk about like, you know, how she can be successful in her role. Like I help her with that because, like, to your point, I've established that tenure with their company. And at this point, yeah, I probably can be the one educating her on her company's culture and the company fundamentals because of that relationship and because of how much I've done for them. So absolutely. And I think that's actually one of the biggest things about having that longstanding relationship. And although we're not, you know, internal for them, we still play a huge role in being a part of their company's success. This client also, because they've been with us for a long time, and they're actually one of like a larger client, they're retail. They have a lot of the strategic plan items checked off of their list, which is expected because of how long they've been with us. But, you know, we still do maintenance of revisions to the forms, handbooks, documents, policies, all of those things. And we actually have bi-weekly meetings. So we meet every 2 weeks and sometimes even more often if she wants to talk about other stuff. A lot of it is actually employee relations issue. Again, it's retail, so they do have a lot of those. But, you know, my advice is important to her. and our business relationship is really strong. And, you know, she always tells me how she appreciates the partnership. And that is maybe also because she kind of has a sole HR role and she doesn't have that many people to talk to internally, but she has me to consult with. But I think that's just also what makes our relationship even more stronger. So having us as an advisor, it's not just about, okay, what can you help me do to stay compliant? It's about knowing that you have someone to help you advise and collaborate with for any and all situations that may arise and to help with the company and their success. And I know that for me, I've had clients tell me, like, it gives me peace of mind knowing that you're here to assist me when it's needed, and that's just good enough. And so again, it's because of that long-standing and trusting relationship that we've established.
Right. Yeah. It's lonely being in HR.
Yeah.
It can be.
Yeah, it can be. Yeah.
It definitely is. Well,
Yeah.
so let me ask you a question. You know, maybe you'll tell our guests about pick the client that you believe you've had the biggest impact on and how you've done so. Can you think
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
who you had the biggest impact on?
Yeah, one particular client comes to mind. And the biggest issue was probably around an ER issue, but I think overall we had the biggest impact on because it's one of my larger clients. They actually have different types of businesses. So it's not all just restaurant related, it's different industries, but they oversee all of them. My point of contact is actually one of the business partners. So they had took over this location, inherited all of the employees, managers, everything. They, kept everything the same, but they didn't really have that foundation in place, right? So we did have to start off with doing a brand new handbook for them. The one that they had was so old and it was from the other company. So we had to apply the new policies to this company. They didn't really have a compliant new hire package. They actually wanted different policies to be developed to fit their industry for their new hire package too. They wanted to get a performance review process in place. So there was a lot of things that we needed to work on, like at the beginning with them. And of course, they were dealing with a lot of employee relation issues, right? They were coming in, they knew what type of culture that they wanted. They were really trying to establish that foundation. So they were getting a lot of pushback from the employees. The employees didn't like that. They didn't want, well, that's not how we did it before. That kind of thing that they were dealing with.
Right.
And she had never had to deal with this stuff before. So we were on the phone with her, talking her through all of these employee relation issues, helping her through, how to handle them, how to talk to them. She also needed assistance. So they took one of the operation manager from another location, promoted her into a HR role. So we were working with her separately to get her developed to be able to handle the position. So we were working with both of them simultaneously. And this one day we were doing a check-in meeting and the business partner came to us and she said, and I say us because I always do my meetings with my specialists too, so that they can kind of get that exposure. So me and my specialist were in this meeting and she comes to us and she's like, I can't do it with this employee anymore. I think I'm gonna have to terminate him. And she said, you know who it is, it's so-and-so. She gave me the name. And I said, okay, has nothing changed? And she said, no. So background on him, he was a manager that they had inherited. And when they were doing all of their introductions, because they had to rehire all of the employees, they got nothing but positive things from him, right? He was always professional. He always had like this bubbly personality around him. But they were starting to get complaints from the employees. At first, they thought it was just initial pushback because the employees didn't want to do what he was saying. But then they started saying he's rude, we can never get him, he's always hiding out in the manager room, all of these other things, which was going against the type of culture that they were trying to establish in the new location. So she said, we've talked to him. I think they actually had given him 2 write-ups at this time. So his third write-up would have been his final. And I said, and she's like, I think we're gonna have to terminate him. We don't have anyone in place. We don't know what we're gonna do. And I said, hold on, let's put him on a PIP. So we sat down, we said, okay, the PIP is gonna have a 30, 60, and 90-day check-in. During the PIP, they actually removed him from the manager duties and said, we're gonna have you working the front. I need you to be interacting with your employees, you know, the different things like that. After the 30 days of the check-in, she came to me, she said, I don't think it's working. I think we're still gonna have to terminate him. Said, hold on, we still have time, right? It's only at the 30-day check-in. We told him we would give him 90 days. Let's just try something different. What's some of the feedback that you're getting? The employees are still saying that if he's not in the office, he'll go and sit in the booth with a book, like the manager book, and say, I'm studying, I'm training, don't bother me, leave me alone. He wasn't doing the schedule right. If the employees were asking him questions, he was very like abrupt. Wasn't really conversational with them. And none of that was really changing. I said, okay, take away the manager book from him. If he's using that as his outlet, he doesn't need it, right? He's not in that manager position right now. He doesn't need to have that manager book. They also they also told him that he had to be interacting more with the employees. He wasn't allowed to hide out in the manager's office anymore. He needed to be up front. So we did some trainings for him as well, because they were also noticing that he really wasn't interacting with the employees well. He was kind of resorting back, like if an employee said something to him, he wouldn't make it conversational. He was like blurting out the answers. When he was correcting the employees were doing something wrong, but he just wasn't correcting them in the right way. And he was always doing it around other employees too, right? So it was making the employees kind of feel embarrassed. So we did some trainings with him. We did a training on giving and receiving feedback, how to build effective relationships, and also how to resolve workplace conflict, right? All of those trainings were kind of working on him developing those people skills. So the trainings, he was also given homework on, right? He wasn't allowed to just come and sit on the trainings. He had to be interactive. He had to do homework. He had to apply some of the things that we would talk about in training with those employees. So this was during the 60-day check-in. So after the 60-day check-in, she said, I'm seeing a difference. I think we're not gonna have to terminate. I do see a light at the end of the tunnel. Great, let's continue doing what we're doing. Then after the 90-day check-in got on, she was all smiles in the meeting. She was so happy. And she said, this is the person that we met when we first took over the location. He just didn't fully understand how to handle those situations. And because the employees were providing so much pushback on the new changes, he was just getting overwhelmed. But now that we kind of trained him, we worked with him through those situations, how to have those conversations, he was feeling better, not only about himself, but about his job, right? He could be the person that he wanted to be to become a manager. And he also was a person that they knew he could be.
Right.
And they didn't have to fire him at the end. We were able to kind of turn that story around. He really just needed some TLC.
Needed some
that's oh, sorry, Jen, go ahead.
No. I mean, and I'm just going to pull this up because we're at the top of the hour here. But I just absolutely love that story, Gloria. And you really took something that could have turned into a negative for both the employee and the employer, right? They didn't have to backfill, and turned it into a positive experience for both. And so I love that.
Well, great story. And a PIP, by the way, I'm sorry, Jen, a PIP is a performance improvement plan.
Yes.
Oh, sorry. Yes.
That's okay. That's all right.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Well, we just wanted to wrap it up here by, first of all, thanking you both, Deidre and Gloria, so much for sharing some of your stories with us today. And then I will just leave you with this. These were some of the items that we talked about today that we do within the HR Elite program: the handbook, the anti-harassment training, the leadership and management training, helping with performance management, and those ER, employee relations issues. reviewing that strategic plan, creating it from scratch, right? And then doing that initial assessment and providing those legal updates for that proactive compliance support. And so while we didn't have time for questions today, we're certainly happy to answer those that were sent in, and we will reach out to you personally. But we just want to thank you for joining us. We hope you found it helpful, and we hope to see you at our next webinar coming up next month. So thank you all.
Thank you,
Thank you,
everyone.
everyone.
Happy Thursday.
Have a
Have a
great
great
day.
day.
Bye-bye.
Bye.